Woodrow Wilson's 14 points announced in January 1918 were not the terms of Treaty of Versailles, but a set of idealistic principles meant to prevent future wars. They promoted open diplomacy, freedom of the seas, reduced trade barriers, arms reduction, and fair colonial policies while calling for territorial restoration in places like Belgium, France, and Russia, new borders for Italy, and self determination for people in Austria Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. The final point proposed a League of Nations. Although Germany agreed to an armistice based on these points, most were rejected by the Allied leaders at Paris, who chose instead to impose harsh penalties on Germany. Only League of Nations remained in the treaty, and the US ultimately refused to join it.
The Treaty of Versailles was the most significant part of the peace treaty that concluded the World War One. It was signed on June 28, 1919, in the Palace of Versailles, exactly 5 years after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which had initiated the war. The background of the treaty begins with the end of the fighting on the Western Front. There was an armistice signed on the November 11th, 1918, which effectively ended the actual fighting, but they did not constitute a formal peace. The Paris Peace Conference, the treaty was a result of the Paris Peace Conference that had started in January 1919. More than 32 countries participated and their nationalists and were represented by their diplomats to decide the terms of the peace in the post-war period. The big four leaders dominated the proceedings: Woodrow Wilson, United States; David Lloyd George, United Kingdom; George Clemenceau, France; and Vittorio Orlando, Italy. Different aims. A lot of the leaders had a different aim, and they had something different in mind in the treaty. For example, Clemenceau wanted to make sure that Germany would never threaten France militarily again, whereas Lloyd George intended to punish Germany, but still maintained the latter as a stable trade partner. Wilson, being the outliner, wanted a more lenient peace and the establishment of a world-keeping peace organization, the League of Nations. Germany itself was excluded from the treaty. They were received a ready document which they had to sign. By the latter part of 1918, Germany had been reduced to a desperate state. There was no hope left in the military situation. The economy was devastated by an effective naval blockade, and the people began to suffer extremely. The government had changed as well, and the new German leadership had little choice but to accept the presented terms. The main aims driving this treaty were mainly was blame. Public opinion in the Allied nations, particularly France and Britain, pronounced Germany wanted to make them accept full responsibility for the war. Hence, the War Guilt Clause, Article 231. They also wanted to impose punishments. The Allies sought to weaken Germany both economically and militarily in order to prevent further aggression in the future. This included massive territorial losses, limits on its armed forces, and colossal payments for reparations. This also redrew maps. The treaty redrew maps of the and borders of Europe, breaking up empires like the Austro-Hungarian and the Ottoman empires and created new nations in their place. The League of Nations, just as Wilson intended, was established. This treaty allowed for the establishment of the League of Nations, a multinational organization designed to settle future disputes on a peaceful basis, basically the father MUN. Its severe conditions of the treaty brought long-term effects, political and economical instability in Germany that helped lay the groundwork 2 decades later for the rise of Adolf Hitler and the new sequel. The Paris Peace Conference involved a series of formal and informal diplomatic meetings held in 1919 and 1920 to establish the peace terms for the defeated Central Powers at the end of World War I. The conference, held in Paris and Paris of Versailles, resulted in 5 peace treaties, with the most important being the Treaty of Versailles with Germany. The key players. The conference was dominated by the Big Four leaders of the main Allied nations. It consisted of George Clemenceau of France, determined to punish Germany and keep it militarily and economically weak; Woodrow Wilson of the United States wanted a more lenient peace based on his 14 points and global peacekeeping organization, the League of Nations; David Lloyd George, United Kingdom, who wished for a settlement that punished Germany, yet not to the degree of being rendered unstable economically and unable to serve as a future trading partner; Vittorio Orlando of Italy, who pursued mostly the territorial gains promised to the Italy by the Allies during the war. Notably, Germany and the other defeated Central Powers were not invited to the conference and had no say in the negotiations. Goal of the conference. The main objectives of the peace conference were to establish a formal peace. It was the aim of the conference to conclude the official state of war, which ended with the armistice of November 11, 1918, to punish the Central Powers. Though the influence of the public opinion, the Allies wanted Germany and its allies to pay a harsh penalty, assuming war guilt and paying reparations. One more task of President Wilson was to form the new international entity called the League of Nations, which would help to peacefully mediate disputes and prevent any other global war. It also served to remap Europe. The conference had the aim of creating new nations and adjusting borders in the case of collapse of certain empires like the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman. The impact and the impact of the Paris Conference Treaty, which they produced 4 treaties for all the defeated allies of Central Powers: the Treaty of Versailles, Germany; the Treaty of Saint Germain for Austria; the Treaty of Neuilly for Bulgaria; and the Treaty of Trianon, Hungary. Treaty of Sevres, subsequently superseded by the Treaty of Lausanne, Ottoman Empire / Turkey. The decisions of the conference, especially in its punitive terms against Germany in the Versailles Treaty, were lasting and controversial. Though they officially ended World War I, they were the ones who founded the foundation for the establishment, and the way they did it had caused much hatred and distaste in Germany. This eventually led to Germany becoming and declaring war in 1949.
The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, imposed tough conditions on Germany. It lost major territories including Alsace-Lorraine, the Polish corridor areas, and all overseas colonies, while Danzig became a free city and Saar went under temporary French control. Germany's military was severely restricted. Its armed capped at 100,000 men, no conscription, no submarines or air force, and the Rhineland had to stay demilitarized. The war guilt clause forced Germany to accept blame for World War I and pay 132 billion gold marks in reparations, damaging its economy. The treaty also created the League of Nations, though the US never joined. In conclusion, the Treaty of Versailles officially ended World War I between Germany and the Allied powers. It was designed to punish Germany, prevent future conflict, and reshape Europe after the war. Germany was forced to accept the blame for the war, pay heavy reparations, give up territory and its colonies, and drastically reduce its military. The treaty also created the League of Nations to promote peace, and its harsh terms caused deep resentment in Germany and also influenced the political tensions that followed.